He was 13 pounds when he died. That's nothing, is it, for a 7-year-old?
They had access to our tiny veins then, and they exploited that.
What we're looking for is contrition.
I think we all want to be vindicated here.
He should never have died. Getting cheaper factor VIII from the States to save money.
That, believe it or not, is the sheet he died on.
A small suitcase, just big enough to hold the memories of their little boy's short life. A blanket, his favourite artwork, and his beloved toys.
It's memories, isn't it? If you haven't got those, you've got nothing left.
Colin Smith was just 7 years old when he died, his tiny body ravaged by hepatitis C and AIDS. Colin was born with haemophilia. The treatment for his blood clotting disorder included a product called factor VIII. What his parents didn't know was that the factor VIII was made in America, using blood farmed from prisoners, drug addicts, and sex workers.
We went to the hospital and they sort of called us out into a corridor, kids running around, parents, and just told us that Colin had become HIV.
It wasn't until later that they fully understood their little boy's infection would become a death sentence.
I think it was about 89 that we realised, because the weight loss was incredible. And we had him home for a little while and you couldn't just pick him up. We had to use a sheepskin because it hurt him. You know, he said, "Mummy, you're hurting," because he was 13 pounds when he died. That's nothing, is it?
For a 7-year-old.
For a 7-year-old.
You can see every sinew and
you could
tendon
see
in his body.
everything.
Colin was treated by Professor Arthur Bloom, who died in 1992. But in the 1980s, he was one of the country's leading haemophiliac specialists. But documents shown at the infected blood inquiry proved Bloom's research carried great risks, and these were never explained to Colin's parents. This record of the first time Colin went into hospital shows that he has never been treated for his haemophilia at this point. Previously untreated patients were useful for research as their responses to new treatments could be tracked. Patients like Colin. This is a letter from Professor Bloom to a colleague after another visit by Colin to hospital, saying he's been given factor VIII and acknowledging that even though this was the British version, there was still a risk of hepatitis, but that this is just something haemophiliacs have to accept. This letter from Professor Bloom to colleagues discusses the risk from AIDS. They accept that one possible case of AIDS has been reported.
Colin was just unlucky enough to be born at the right time. Newly diagnosed haemophiliac, never been treated, which is what they were after, because the documentation states that they're cheaper than chimpanzees. You can only treat a chimp once. You can follow these children throughout their lives, and that's what was going on. And this was going on from the 70s.
Yeah.
Colin wasn't born until 1982, yet they still infected him. So how do they justify that?
You're convinced your son was part of a trial?
Yes.
I'm 100% convinced, yeah.
And he was being experimented on?
Yes.
100%.
Yeah.
Why are you so convinced?
Just when we think back, at the time, no, we didn't, but when we think back, it was just blood tests, blood tests, blood tests, blood tests. I mean, we've got all his records and it just says swollen glands, palpable liver. We were told none of this.
There is now a danger that has become a threat to us all.
The threat of HIV and AIDS was only just emerging, and this ignorance drove a hate-filled campaign against all those impacted.
Anyone can get it, man or woman.
The stigma forced Colin and Jan to move home and to be shunned by some of their own community, all while still caring for their dying son.
If you ignore AIDS, it could be the death of you.
All the parents protested and said, we're not having an AIDS kid in this school, because we were known as the AIDS family, you know, within of him starting. I mean, you know, we had AIDS dead right on the house, and you're not talking little. We had, it was like 6-foot letters, AIDS dead. We had crosses scraped into the door. The phone calls in the middle of the night weren't
very nice.
As Colin's condition deteriorated, his parents decided to bring him home for what would be his last Christmas with the family. It was against the wishes of Professor Bloom. They were told haemophiliacs with AIDS should die in hospital and be cremated quickly.
And do you know what? He asked for a bike, and we actually got him a bike. He never rode it, obviously, because he was too ill. But he wanted a bike. And his brothers, they all have bikes. I'm not going to not get him a bike.
That difficult decision to remove Colin from hospital to spend his last days with his family at home proved to be the right one.
He was on my lap, and he just got up to you, didn't he? He said, I can't see, Daddy. I can't see. And then he just laid back. My hand was on his chest. And you know, for a mother to actually feel the rise and fall of his chest, waiting for it to stop, because that's what I was doing. I was waiting for it to stop. And then it stopped. And I just said to you, didn't I think he's gone. And I can remember shaking him a little bit, but he'd gone.
Hayden Lewis was also one of Professor Bloom's patients, and like Colin, he was a haemophiliac being treated with infected factor VIII. The treatment cost Hayden his life. After being infected with HIV, he died in 2010. But by this time, Hayden had started putting together the pieces of what had happened to him and to others. Research that was passed on to the inquiry by his family.
Hayden had a list of all the infected batches, and so, you know, he could look back on his own notes and say, there, I did there, I did there. Little Colin should never have been given it. Bloom didn't even listen to his own advice. He should never have died.
Come down to money, didn't it?
Money, saving money, getting cheaper factor VIII from the States to save money.
Yeah.
Gaynor has received interim compensation for her husband's death, but Hayden had also unknowingly passed on his HIV infection to her. And for this, she's not entitled to compensation because she was not directly infected by the NHS. Another example of the scandals and injustices that must be put right. And it's these injustices that lawyers representing the infected and affected have been fighting for decades. One lawyer representing hundreds of victims and their families says the fight for justice has been long and hard.
The trials have been known about for a long, long time. In particular, they were the subject of evidence given to the inquiry 2 or 3 years ago. One of the problems has always been with this scandal is its information saturation. It's unfortunate because the revelations which came out in the inquiry were absolutely amazing, unbelievable. It was frightening to read them, it was frightening to read the statements, it was frightening to hear the evidence.
And it is this dogged pursuit of the truth that means the horror must be revisited and relived.
It's spine-chilling for us, you know, it really is.
Gary, Steve, Richard and Aid left Trelaw School nearly 40 years ago, but the legacy of their time here is devastating. Born with haemophilia, their parents sent them here in the hope that the school's on-site medical facilities would allow the boys to have as normal a childhood as possible.
It's changed so much, hasn't it? In the last 40 years, it's just completely different.
Health officials at the school used the boys to run medical trials without their or their parents' knowledge, infecting pupils with deadly diseases, including hepatitis and HIV.
We were all put on injections called prophylaxis, which means we were having injections usually every other day, 3 times a week. So they had access to our tiny veins then, and they exploited that. They put product in and they took blood out, and they researched on that blood without informing our parents.
But every time we went into that treatment room in the morning and sat at the 3-foot square white tables and were presented with bottles to mix ourselves or syringes full of factor 8 to inject ourselves, we were playing Russian roulette. We didn't know what we were giving ourselves.
Documents presented to the inquiry show that the amount of factor 8 blood product used at Treloar's rose substantially during the 1970s and 80s. It was suggested that this was because doctors were treating patients preventatively, despite growing concerns over its safety. Of 123 haemophiliacs who attended Treloar's in those years, 75 have already died.
We came to this school to be educated, as I said, and learn and leave and work. We lost everything. We lost our careers, we lost family members, the list goes on. So what we're looking for is contrition. That's quite important. To back them into a corner and contrition. And an open and frank apology at every level. Every level.
What happened here at Treloar's is one of the darkest chapters in the contaminated blood scandal. The school says it placed its trust in the treatment and advice given out by the NHS clinic based on its site at the time. Gary, Steve, Richard and Aid will attend publication of the report next week, but many of their classmates died waiting for this day to come.
It's been going on for 4 years now, so I think we just want the truth to come out. I think we all want to be vindicated here by telling our story of what went on during that period of time.
I'm just hoping for the relief of the truth coming out. And I'm also hoping on the 21st, which will be Hayden's 14th anniversary when he passed away, that I can go up to his grave and tell him it's sorted.
I want justice to be served properly, not, hypothetically, let's see the people who did this, hopefully criminal charges. If not, as far as I'm concerned, it's manslaughter at least, I gave my son over to his killers, and I can't get the grips with that.
I want people to recognise my son, and I want to be able to go to a cemetery and say, "We've done it, darling, you've done it." That's what I want. And I want an apology. People say it's the money. It's not the money, and I can't get that through to people. It's not the money, I want recognition. I want my son to have his name back. His name was Colin John Smith, and that's what I want people to remember.